And we're going. So
Here we are. Hey everyone. I'm just going to do a few housekeeping things to make it like as smooth as possible. So if everyone can mute themselves so that only one person is talking at a time and then there's no feedback, audio feedback from everyone. So I think if you're on a phone, it maybe be *6. I don't normally use phones, but there's a microphone button that you can press that will mute yourself, and then so you can mute and unmute. And it should have like a little red microphone that was the line. And so Jeremy's, there we go. Great. So people can unmute obviously whenever they want to, but it just cuts down on the audio quality for the recording and also for us. There's a lot of echo. So as Chris said, there is a agenda / outline in the chat. We may or may not get to all of it, and I will do my best to try to get to all of it, but as these facilitations go with these kinds of topics, we're going to go where we go. The work I say, we go where the heat is, we go where the juice is. So, and that's where we're going. That's where we're going. But I want to do a particular kind of check-in, and this check-in will prime us in a good way. So I'm going to use some neurology terms and some somatics terms, and maybe there's too much jargon. So if I use jargon, you don't understand it, please let me know. And I will explain. But we're going to do a check-in, and it's going to be a brief check-in, but and I will model first, but I'll explain it. And so we're just sort of priming the system over and over again. So we'll say our name or the name that we choose to go by, and then we'll say our pronouns if we want to say our pronouns. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can practice that. And then as for check-ins, we're going to do a very specific check-in. So we'll start with sensations. Sensations that you're having in your body. And we're going to focus primarily on pleasant, positive, neutral, or interesting sensations around being here at this call, right? We're going to try to notice, but not go far into negative or crunchy sensations. But we're just going to practice what it's like to really tune our attention in a particular way and then listen from that place too. I will model it and you'll sort of see how the fluctuation happens. Like no one's going to be perfect. I'm not looking for perfection. But what I am looking for is this tuning of attention so that we can actually differentiate different kinds of signals and then what we choose to verbalize, right? Because we're going to start to talk about communication and how people speak and listen and what these things are coming from. And so I want to sort of allow your system to tune in this particular way. The physiological state has a lot of things happening inside of it, but what we choose to focus on is really important, what we choose to bring up and evoke. So, and that'll be like a minute or two, like at max. So here we go, I'll model. My name is Dare. My pronouns are they, them. Sensations in my body right now that I'm feeling. I can notice a bit of this tingling in my mouth, and my heart is racing, not racing, but sort of like beating a little bit faster because I've just met all of you. And that feels exciting in a way, and that feels a little interesting. And then there's a kind of like band of energy around my diaphragm that's really wanting to settle. And I'm noticing that it's trying to go down and settle further down into my lower body. Yeah, and if I tune in just one layer deeper, I notice that there's kind of a warm quality in front of me. That's sort of like a warmth, I think, from all of you and from Chris and just from the work that we're doing, sort of a compassionate, but it's like warm and it's a little bit red, but it feels like it's like painted like right in front of me. So that's my check-in. And let's go alphabetically by first name.
all right, that's me as I did a quick, I was like quickly check. So when you said that warmness, that was really weird. I was like, I also feel this warmness in front, but kind of also in the throat. Now, granted, I did have tea like a half hour ago, but this feels different than that. The tingling is kind of between the shoulder blades and at the neck. So if you're going to look at excitement there, also Chris, she, her. So that's my part.
I suppose I'm next. Gary, uh, he, him. I, as far as sensations are, I feel my diaphragm, um, feel a little bit of restriction. I've had a little bit of a head cold, but that's a different thing. But I feel energy coming up through my abdomen. I feel a nice cool sensation of my feet connected to the ground. Um, I feel an almost excited tension in the top of my heart. Again, I think sharing, meeting, expressing kind of brings that about. Yeah.
I'm Jenn, she, her, and I feel a little bit of warmth in my lower back. Feels nice, actually. I feel my breathing kind of exiting just past my diaphragm, which also feels good. I feel a little bit of tingling at my throat, probably because talking always does that. A little bit of excitement and a little bit of, nervousness. So yeah, that is me.
Okay. Also, Selena will be here soon, by the way. She's just closing up the whole studio right now. I'm Jeremy. It's fine. Not that picky, to be honest. But as far as sensations, I think my legs are feeling super well. Like glutes, hamstrings, quads. I don't really know why, but they're like ready to go. Not for what, but other than this, I feel pretty balanced, nice and calm today. I think it's one of these kind of days where I just feel like I can blend in with the world, just sink in and be a part of it.
I'm Jeremy, he, him, and warmth was definitely the predominant thing that I'm feeling, mostly around my ribs, and now that I'm talking, rushing up to my face. And my legs feel tingly isn't quite the right word. Like I interpret it as antsiness, but I can't describe the feeling itself very well, but they feel something that makes me want to move them. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So now we're going to take about 30 seconds to just sort of reflect internally, personally, on what it felt like to even have that kind of check-in. Like your mirror neurons probably fired off, some stuff's probably happened. You've checked in different ways before in your life. So I just want you to sort of notice what you notice. And we're going to open it up for small dialogue of reflection of like, how was that for people? That particular exercise of talking in that particular way. What did it do? Do you have any questions? It's gonna a little bit free form. And if there's no questions, we'll move on. Or if there's no commentary, that we'll move on.
I thought it was really interesting. It's very interesting to have other people show you how you feel, right? I don't think I would have got the warmth. I don't think I would have necessarily dictated temperature until you said so. So that was really interesting, that the mirror neurons, but also just, hey, they're right. That is me, which is very bizarre for me as a kind of, tends to think of herself as a very individualistic, like only I know me kind of thing. So I'll shut things down there.
I think it's I enjoy the process of sharing the sensations and talking about what we're all feeling. Obviously, there's a certain commonality to the human disposition where there's certain places we can feel, but I think sharing a little bit more of, you know, because we are all movers, so we're all very in tune with our bodies. So we check in with how our body's feeling, and we talk to people about how our body's feeling often. But there's other sensations of, you know, the caliber, quality, tingle, warmth, tension, grip, you know, all of those things that, you know, are nice to be guided to check into.
I was surprised that I didn't enjoy sharing. I enjoyed you all sharing. And then when it came to me, I think I am very used to checking in with how I'm feeling, and I am very used to talking about sensation, but not the combination of the two. I think I'm used to talking about other people's sensation more, and feeling my own feelings by myself. So that was interesting.
I think you're kind of super reminiscent of like a guided meditation start kind of thing. You know? So that was nice with the compounded thing of I have all these people watching me as well. So I wouldn't say it made me feel uncomfortable, but definitely felt different to try and, rather than just feel it and take note of it and then kind of move on, where you were doing like a meditation type thing, to be like, okay, well now what's the best way to, you know, express this to these people so they can understand what's going on.
Jen, you're going to opt out for share? It's totally fine. Just
Yeah,
say,
no, it was.
okay.
I kind of agreed with everybody else. I'm like,
Great.
yep, I can. All of that's
Great. Awesome. Yeah. Just checking in. There's no need to share. Great. So these things are all part of a very complex web of how people communicate internally in our own ecosystem, and then externally in this sort of like shared ecosystem that we have. Then there's mirror neurons, and there's so many things. I don't want to go into that so much, but basically what we're trying to do when we communicate, hopefully, the best thing that we can do is be in our polyvagal system, which is our vagus nerve, which is ventral vagal, which is social engagement, which allows us to both play and take risks, but also feel good about doing that. Now, there's that fine line between the parasympathetic system, which is engaged and still digesting and resting and feeling nourished, and then the sympathetic system, which starts to shut down our ability to do any of those things that I just mentioned. So in any moment, anybody is put on the spot can go straight to their sympathetic system and start to go into fight or flight, and then even more, they could go into freeze. But there's some other states that I just want to let you know. So I call them like the 6 states of trauma, which is if you're not in your ventral vagal, if you're not in polyvagal, and you're not feeling connected to your sensations, especially your lower body sensations, which you could think of as being living in the lower dantian, like qigong with the lower dantian, or your groin, or all of that stuff. Like that's where your sensations sort of live, the enteric nervous system, the roots of the vagus nerve, right? So if you're not there, because we're not there all the time, if you're not there, then we're doing other things. And the first step of managing our threat matrix and the social threat matrix and the internal perceived threat matrix is we go into faux, F-A-U-X. So it's fake. It's a fake state of engagement. It's like, I'm faking being regulated. That's basically what you're doing, because you can't do what you need to do. You feel stressed, too much noise, something's going on. And so you're faking it. And so we call that faux. And that's like an extra band outside of your window of tolerance. That's not quite ventral vagal. It's not quite playtime, relaxing, nice talking to each other, but it's manageable. However, most of our society is living in that 24/7 coffee, nicotine. It's all management. It's all management. It's never actually dropping in. And so we can start to, the problem with faux, and why I started with it, it's because it's not usually talked about, but it's sort of our default. It's like we start to think that regulation is this other thing. We start to think that regulation is management. It's not. Regulation is not management. Management is what we're trying to do to get back to regulation. So regulation should be a coherent, synchronous process that the system starts to do naturally. But we live in this world, we're constantly getting disrupted. So we're always managing. But hopefully we can get back to a place where we're not managing so much and we're just feeling the thing happening. So that's faux, fake. And then we can get into the next step of management, which is fawning or appeasing people, which is, I'm going to say what I think this person needs to say because I don't want this person to exile me or say gossip about me or think bad thoughts about me. So I'm just going to not be honest. I'm not going to drop it. I'm just going to manage the social engagement level with fawning or appeasement. And this can go to various degrees of danger, right? We can fawn in the grocery store when it's really not a big deal, or we can fawn in an abusive relationship because we have to survive and we have to protect ourselves. And this could be an abusive relationship that's intimate or like just your boss. Maybe you have a boss that's abusive and you're like, fuck, I really need this job, but I got to keep managing. And so people are doing this all the time. So the reason I bring this up is because many of our clients might try to fawn for us because we become a leadership or attachment figure or a parental surrogate, right? And so we have to recognize a bit of, is this person giving away their power to me, and how can I, in the kindest way, keep giving them back to them? It's not mine. I don't need it. I've got my own power. Here you go, right? So there's this levels of trauma, right? The faux, the fake regulation, because like we gotta just do it. And then we have the like social fawning regulation. And then we go into states of fight and flight and freeze. Freeze being the most damaging state that our system is in, because freeze is the most biologically resource intensive state. So it's basically like looping anxiety thoughts, confusion about authentic desires, not knowing what you want or how to get it, not knowing how to be safe. You're basically just in a constant state of like, am I safe? 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 And it's like, you can't really do anything from that state. And people are in that state a lot more than we think we are, because you can basically learn to exist in that state and think that it's like all you're going to get, right? So we have a lot of people coming to us as clients for various reasons, and they're coming to us for one reason, but the underlying nervous system state is actually the reason. So when I look at people, I hear the content of what they're saying, and I watch the behavior of what they're doing, their facial expressions, their tone of voice, all this stuff. And I try to go, what nervous system state is this person in? What really what nervous system state are they in? Because if I'm trying to pretend like I'm going to listen, like, oh, they're trying to tell me that they're in regulation, but they're really not, and I'm just going to pretend that they are too, then then we're not actually doing a service for them in some way, because they're going to go out of our sight and feel worse. And it's not even really going to be our fault, but they're going to feel worse, because the part that we want to do is we want to activate the mirror neurons in a positive way, very gently, when we're communicating. So the exercise we did before, long circle back to what we just did, is a way to model a way of being that doesn't get too deep into the junk, because maybe we don't feel safe enough to do that yet. But it models a way of just being like on this surface level of sensation, where we can just sort of scan and express, deal with the small upticks of anxiety that come from just that little bit of doing. And then we regulate. We regulate in real time in front of other people, which shows their system, oh, I could do that too. And it also has the added benefit of what Chris said, which is, oh, I didn't notice that until you said it, and now I really noticed it and I feel better. So now that's like group coherence, a larger sort of like, oh, we're feeling together. Not just alone, we're feeling together, right? So we're titrating this kind of communication. So I work primarily as a trauma therapist, and I do racial justice work. So I'm always trying to be like, what's the next best right thing for people? The next best right thing for me, the next best right thing for you, which might be, oh, let's take a few calming breaths, or let's look around and see some colors. Literally these micro adjustments that bring the system into greater coherence and more into ventral vagal, right?
I just want to jump in super quickly as you're
Yeah.
saying this, like I see this in the kids every day, especially like I just mentioned it's the start of the semester, and like all of these things are present and all these behaviors are present. I couldn't name them, but I could be like that. So just interestingly wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to stop talking now because I just gave you a chunk of information to digest, and I want to give you time to digest it verbally or non-verbally if you want to. But yeah, let's open it up for conversation. Maybe there's some noticings, or maybe there's like just a resonance of like, oh yeah, that's legit, or I feel that, or something. So unmute yourselves as needed and have a little reflection.
I find the mirror neuron aspect really interesting, and I know I use that a lot in my work. If I can tell a client's really amped, I will bring myself down, not purposefully. In hindsight, I'm always like, oh, I totally did that on an unconscious level, and they will bring themselves down as well. So it's nice you did a really nice job explaining that, and it always gives me food for thought when I start reflecting on things like that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's definitely how that works in a one-on-one setting, when you're working with different personality types and people that just came in from flipping off the truck driver or whatever.
I'll kind of jump in on that one. I think I enjoy hearing this kind of verbiage around, talking about the stress state and all the different degrees of stress and how they manifest themselves. Again, kind of I work with people in pain, so there's a lot of this regulation that goes on. I think sometimes when you vocalize that it's actually happening and you're seeing that state of being in front of you, I like the idea of slowly getting them to come to your energy level and recognizing the use of that phenomenon of the mirror neurons. But I feel sometimes like there's this other aspect of it when you address it and you call it out outright, where people finally check in with the fact that they're in that state. And I've had a number of people just break down in tears in those moments. And it's almost like a little bit of like a factory hard reset at that moment. And then you can kind of move forward from there. But again, I'm very excited about the terminology we're using.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so there's no one size fits all for healing. You have to basically see the pattern 1,000 times before you're like, oh, I know how to get through that thicket, like whatever. But the fact remains is that like we know it sort of like it's in our DNA, right? Like even if we don't know it consciously, it's in our DNA. And so the words I'm using are just trying to help you remember what you already know. And so that's actually a lot of what's actually happening. It feels like a remembering. And so when the person has the hard reset, they get to remember their whole self, not a compartmentalized version of themselves that is trying to manage. And from that state, we can call it mindfulness or the observer or the sacred witness or all of these, poetic things that we can call it. But really, it's just integration starting to happen, which is I can observe and compassionately be with a part of my system without having to identify so fully with that system, that part, that I can't see any other part, right? So these constellations are always happening, which is why when we do these check-ins and I help people name and identify particular things, and it's like you shape the field. You're like, let's go this way, not this way. It's just like movement, right? It's like, hey, we're going to smooth out that arc. It's actually, this is the form. It's not this other thing. This is the form, right? So we're getting people to sort of go in this place, in this direction where we go, oh, right, that feels better. And better is better. Because once we hit better is better, the system sort of bumps up to be able to hold more stimulus. And then we're like, oh, that feels good. But if we go too far, too fast, it bumps down. So we have to go bump up, stabilize. Oh, here's a new stimulus, but it's a good stimulus, right? Oh, bump up, right? So we're trying to always do these little small bumps and then stabilize positively. So pleasurable sensation, orientation, literally being with the senses in a way that actually regulates our system, right? Like being able to take a walk and really attune to the trees moving in the wind, and then all of a sudden your system bumps up pleasurably without you really doing much of anything. but there's a bit of allowing that has to happen, right? And as we're working with clients, the thing that we might have to recognize is that their attachment wounds, their early developmental trauma, might be prohibiting them from regulating just because we're talking with them. Because there's this like dyadic relationship that actually is triggering their parental issues or something. So a lot of the times we're trying to get them, hopefully, to focus on this bigger field, which is why somatics is so great, because it's like, hey, just focus on the pleasure of sensing. You don't have to like engage with me. Just like move your arm and feel how that feels. Oh, that feels so good, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. Okay, great. Right? Or like, oh, attune to the trees. Oh, now I feel a lot better. Yeah, because you don't have to perform for me as the trainer or the therapist or whatever, right? And so this performance quality, we want to start to get people away from thinking that we have to perform when we're communicating, right? Like my expression is not necessarily a performance that dictates how you will treat me, but we're in a society that absolutely does force people to do that. So in the bubble that we get to have for like 30 minutes, an hour and a half, how can we take them out of that threat bubble and into the bubble of like, yeah, you could actually just lay on the floor for an hour if you really needed to. If you really needed to just lay on the floor and like draw some pictures or something, that might actually be what the system needs in order to integrate this one little boop, this one little chiropractic boop. Don't need a lot, just a little bit, right? So all of this is to say, you know, like we focus on threat too much. We focus on the problem too much, which actually exacerbates the problem. So mostly we have to focus on feeling good. And then once we're feeling good enough, then we can really like touch the problem and let that field of goodness that we've generated sort of go and envelop the problem. It's like salve on a wound. It's like, oh, here's this good stuff. And then breathe into the problem just 5%. Oh, now let's go back to the good stuff, right? And so I'm saying all of this because this is actually how we can hear people better. Like if people are not in threat, then we can talk about things like privilege. We can talk about things like racism if people are not in constant threat. But even the mention of that word makes it so that you have to do this regulation game, because I'm like, yeah, privilege and racism. And you're like, oh, yeah, right? And this is what's happening in the room all the time. So we're like, okay, the energy rose up out of your dantian and into your head, and we're going to put it back down into the lower dantian, right? So you went up a little bit into sympathetic, and then we all go back down together into parasympathetic, right? So it's happening right now behind the scenes. I'm just sort of narrating it, you know, a little bit, you know, because we're a group field now that's venturing into this territory together. We don't want to leave anybody behind. So I feel like we can probably start to move on to one of the next outlines, but I want to check in with you, Chris. I want to check in with the rest of the group, sort of like how are we feeling at this point or in this conversation? Are there anything that needs to be said or completed? Are we leaving any threads loose? You know, just checking in.
Something I'm really curious about is Sanders, because he works with parkour, which inherently there's a bit of risk and there's a bit of fear. And that is, when I say a bit, that is a predominant thing that is paralyzing. So I'm particularly curious if he sees these patterns or if he now has some terms to use into what he does.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, some of the terminology is 100% new, the way that you're describing it, but as I'm listening to it, it just makes sense. I mean, the exact same thing, the bubble thing that you were describing is, you know, just like the little bit of exposure therapy that I think of, because, you know, in the very beginning, you know, maybe someone's just up on something 2 feet high, and that's like, okay, that's their threshold. They can be here, but they can't do anything here. They're not going to jump or move or anything, but they can just stand there and maybe try to get some breaths for a little while, and then they can come back down. You know, maybe they're there for a session or 2 or 3, and then, okay, maybe they can now balance up at that height or something. And so it's like, I mean, it's this constant, in a class setting, finding, you know, the technical, the mental, and the physical threshold of, you know, where they're at and their comfort level and trying to slowly expand it. You know what I mean? In a gentle way, like not in a forceful way at all. You know, sometimes I had, especially when I was first coming here, I had in Turkey, because I mean it's not my language. I don't really speak it or anything like that, so it's hard to get maybe my message across sometimes to the kids. And I had one who just like didn't want to listen to anything. He just wanted to jump on the trampoline the whole time and then do some flips. And I didn't care that much, but the trampoline's like super loud. So I'm like trying to tell the other kids how to do stuff. And it was like, wait, 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 going on in the background. And so it's like, okay, I'll just, feel this out and then just be patient with him as I can, because you can see clearly, like, I think he's probably having people not that happy with him and telling him what to do all the time. And then he gets into this classroom and all the other teachers have been like the same way, so they're still just trying to control him versus just let him like do his thing. Fast forward, I don't know, how many months has it been now? Like 5 or 6 months now, and he's one of my best students. He asks for permission to do stuff before he, goes off and does his own thing, but he's most often with me learning, whatever it is I want to teach him, and then, also working on the stuff that he wants to work on too. So it's like something that just took a little realizing, like, okay, yeah, maybe some kids need a little bit of discipline to like realize this is a situation where they need to be serious, but sometimes you can see kids that are like so burnt out on having to like be a certain way the whole time that they need to, kind of as you said, just know it's fine to just like exist. There's no expectations of anybody. That's another thing I see keeps people from parkour, is that expectation that like, oh crap, I gotta do like sketchy jumps and like be on the buildings and do like vaults and stuff. And I mean, you guys saw with the session I did with you that it's like, it doesn't have to be anything. It's just experiencing your environment and your body in a different way, So I like it a lot. I really appreciate the stuff that you're saying.
Yeah. So you'll see that I'm just sort of translating. It's like we all do this thing, but like we just have better and better maps, and we just have layers and layers of maps, and we can go, oh, all the maps point to the same thing. Why? Because we're all talking about like human physiology and neurology and stuff like that, and dynamics of interpersonal stuff. So all of this is good. It's like we built some soil. So now we can probably go to step 2 of the outline. Which I'm just going to read it. It says, how can we use this somatic awareness to mediate feedback from those who disagree and might strongly disagree and perceive things from a different cultural view, right? So here we are. We've said something that affects somebody else and they don't like it, or vice versa. Or we're trying to get them to understand a concept that is difficult for them to want to understand because they have all of this stuff in the background being like, no, right? So the first thing that I want to say is it's only ever our job to stay regulated. It's not our job to caretake or fawn or hypermanage or go into a fight with someone or run from. It's really our job to stay regulated. And when we can't stay regulated, it's our job to say that I can't stay regulated. And then to come back into regulation and negotiate from there, right? So every time we come into tension or conflict, everybody's attachment wounds start lighting up. It's just what happens. It's like a people thing. It's like, I remember all the times that this went poorly, and I remember all the strategies that I have to do to make sure I survive as a child, blah, blah, blah. And everyone just starts going, like those dinosaurs in Jurassic Park with the right? So it's like that just happens. So the one thing I want to say is, first of all, let yourself off the hook that this is happening, because this is like human nature, how to deal with threat and stuff. So let yourself off the hook. Don't think that you have to be perfect. Don't think that you have to say the right words all the time. This is a big issue in like very hyper vigilant social justice realities in which people get hyper vigilant when you say a word that is coming from your mouth and you have a certain color skin and a certain gender that they perceive as, and then you say a word that's not the right word, right? And so this is something you have to realize, that person whether, like, regardless of the ideology, so we're not into ideology right now, we're still in the realm of sensation and nervous system states, because we can graft any ideology or rationality onto anything and say, well, this is the moral right, this is the morally righteous thing to do. It's like, well, I'm not so interested in that as much as I'm interested in what's your nervous system doing right now when you are, like, what is it doing? Are you in ventral vagal? If you're in ventral vagal, yeah, it's all on the table. We can talk about all sorts of things and all sorts of ideas and whatevers, and maybe like all sorts of stuff. We can talk about it if we're in ventral vagal, right? But we have to stay there and we have to get there and we have to know how to do that. And so there's a bit of just constant, the work is internal. The work is this inner alchemy that they talk about in Qigong and Neigong, but it's not about like becoming a hermit. It's about just integrating a system that has stimulus, and then you integrate the stimulus in a compassionate way so that you don't have to go into sympathetic responses, right? And it's easier said than done. Like I'm like practicing for like years and years, and I'm like, oh, this, if you've never really done this stuff, it takes about a year and a half or to 3 years to really rewire your nervous system to this kind of way of being. And so it's just like any other martial art. Oh, you want to learn jujitsu? Great. What's your commitment level? Because this shit's going to take a while. You want to learn Pilates? This stuff's going to take a while. Like, you think you're going to get anywhere in like one class a month? I don't know. You have to be kind of up, just kind of legit and straightforward with people. It's like, oh, well, you'll probably get this, but something's better than nothing. But also, here's the real timeline. So when we're talking about nervous system regulation and actually healing the nervous system, we have this sort of 3-year arc that's sort of like a beginner to intermediate phase where we're like, oh, great, this is just now part of my life. So we're trying to stay regulated, and we're trying to notice our sensations so that when we get dysregulated, we can just say that out loud to people. This is like the interesting part about tension. What breaks the tension is just being like, wow, I'm feeling really dysregulated right now. And I know that because all this energy is like rushing up to my head, and I have all this pain in my body all of a sudden, and I just don't want to continue until I deal with that. Like really practicing this kind of way of being. And when someone is calling you out on something that they're in a state of, whatever, like they do the velociraptor thing, then what you have to do is go, yeah, I can see it really affected you with what I said. And I will take some time to really think about that and see what I can do better. And wondering if we can really even continue, or what has to happen for you to feel safe in this moment. Like taking a real step back from like personal, like just being like, hey, the thing that I said, yeah, it has an impact on you because of the cultural differences and stuff like that. Totally understandable. What do you need to feel supported in this moment? Because the same thing you're doing for yourself, you should be doing for others, which is, what do I need to feel supported in this moment? What do you need to feel supported in this moment? Rather than, we're all threat matrix. Are you going to think I'm a bad person? Oh no, racism, privilege, right? Because that doesn't help anybody, right? So we try to stay away from the ideology and go right back to nervous systems and behaviors, right back to be like, hey, I see and hear these things that are coming in from the field, right? This stuff about racism and privilege and pain, I see it, I tag it, I notice it, maybe even I speak to it directly, but I don't stay there, because that's going to spin a group out more and more, or a group or a person, right? Because we're just going into what we call a trauma vortex. It's like, great, let's talk about all the bad things, and let's only think about the bad things now that we can't fix and we can't solve, and all the bad things that happened to all your ancestors. Let's do it right now. It's not going to help people. So what we have to do is notice that trajectory and then go, oh, okay. Benign neglect. And it's not the same as bypassing. It's just benign neglect. It's like, I don't have the hazmat suit, so I can't walk into that room right now. Even if you really want me to walk into that room, I need to be prepared. And then someone else can go, you know what? I get it. And they might say, oh, fragility. And it's like, well, That might be real, and it's okay to be fragile. In this particular instance, I want to show up well, not show up and hurt myself or you, right? So we have this method of approaching danger, which is the same thing as what Jeremy Sanders was talking about. We're approaching danger, or maybe danger is approaching us, and we're like, okay, I'm gonna stop and just breathe and look at where I'm at and be like, this is all I can do right now. This is where I'm at. I'm on this ledge. This is the ledge. Oh, great. Now I know that this is the ledge, right?
So real quickly, Dare, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how you deal with the immediacy of interaction.
Yeah.
And I think from that answer, you stay with them and let them be.
Yeah, I do.
Right.
I do. I stay with them and let them be, but I do it from a place of compassion, which includes compassion for myself and all of my parts that also might have various opinions on what is happening, which I could feel in danger. I could feel like someone's threatening me. They're telling me that I'm threatening them, and I can feel like they're threatening me at the same time. So what I have to do is go, okay, I have compassion for all those voices and all those thoughts, and I don't know what any of this means yet, because we have it's like batch processing, like, let's use some computer terms. It's like, okay, our bodies are digesting stimulus and our minds are trying to digest it first, but it doesn't work that way. I think we all know that. We have to experience something physically, sensationally, maybe many times before our mind can go, oh, I understand what's happening. I actually can know what's happening right now. So in those immediacy moments, we're going to just slow it down right now, and I'm just going to give you a little diagram in the air. So let's imagine a cardioid wave, like a heartbeat wave. Let's imagine a heartbeat wave. A heartbeat wave is peak, here's the rise, arousal, peak, descent, and the descent is a little bit lower than the beginning, so that's the valley. So peak, valley, recovery. Peak, valley, recovery. Peak, valley, recovery. Peak, valley, recovery. This is happening all the time in all these various systems of your body. So a neuron firing, a heartbeat, breath wave. Right? So what we have to do is notice that the immediacy is that, oh shit, I peaked way too high. I spiked up. Oh shit, and now I'm crashing. Right? So we have to level out, not necessarily level it out like, oh, I'm just bored, but go back to this healthy asynchronous rhythm. The heart rate variability stuff is really key here, because it's not a symmetrical. Each heart rate is a little bit different, but there's an overall pattern that's really healthy. It's like, oh, ba-boom, ba-doom, ba-boom, ba-doom, ba-boom, ba-doom. It's like a good rhythm. You could dance to it. It's not super monotonous. It's not like boom, 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 boom. You can't really dance to that. You get freaked out. And it's not really like nothing. It's not like Beethoven where you're like, what the fuck's the rhythm here? I don't know what's going on. So you want this like rhythm, this dance rhythm, which is like slow and fast and slow and fast and slow and fast and slower and faster and faster and slower, the syncopated thing, right? So the immediacy is, can you tune into that and actually say, I want that instead? Which means I got to let my system go towards the good. And then hopefully the mirror neuron activation will help the other person also go towards the good, but managing their own system. Because I'm basically telling people, you don't have to caretake me with what I'm doing. I'm basically saying it with my physiology. I'm saying, you don't have to caretake me, but you might want to have compassion for yourself the way that I'm having compassion for myself. Because at this moment, we're diverging, and we can't converge until we've diverged. So notice this motion, right? Kundalini, Ida Pingala, the Caduceus, all sorts of things, DNA spirals, right? It's DNA spirals. It's the tides, converge and diverge, right? So this Qigong form, right? Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. That's actually what's happening when two people or multiple people are in a room and they hit a tension point. They've converged and they've hit friction. They're like, argh. And then what has to happen naturally is we have to diverge. It's okay. It's okay to diverge and get our systems coherent again before we try to come back together and process together. maybe have another intimate moment where we actually realize, oh, that's what actually is happening for you when I said that word, or what's happening for you just being in this institution. Oh, you're having a trauma response because this institution is actually damaging to you and your ancestors. That's real, right? So we notice these things, but we may not be able to attend to all of them or even name them explicitly in the moment. But if we can go somatically back to these primary patterns, we're going to be more than okay. Converging and diverging, this cardioid rhythm of like, oh yeah, you know, oh, I got to lower my heart rate because it's beating too much, it's spiking too much, it's going too far away. So in this immediacy, this is always happening a little bit. It's like a fractal seed. Anytime we're talking to someone, all of these systems are managing the stimulus. All these systems are managing the stimulus. And somebody's going to hit a bandwidth limitation at some point in the talk. You might have hit a bandwidth limitation already in this conversation, but hopefully I'm creating enough of a buffer that you feel like you don't have to like do anything about it. You can just let it pass, right? So when we talk about things like privilege, so now I want to give you this like meaty cognitive thing to chew on. So I consider privilege to be the privilege to dissociate. So let's just talk about it from a class standpoint, not a racial standpoint, from a class standpoint. If I have a lot of money, like an absurd amount of money, lots of digits in the bank account, just feel into like, what if you won the lottery and you have a lot of digits in your bank account? Suddenly the system starts to relax a bit. You're like, oh yeah, I can relax. I can feel good. There's a certain rhythm that comes with feeling real good that you have a lot of resources. So the first thing I want to say is feel that good feeling. Just feel the good feeling of like imagining that you just have a lot of resources. And this might be harder or easier depending on your past experience in life. Like me, I've never had a lot of resources. So for me, saying it is a challenge, and I'm still doing it because I really want to practice. But if you have too many resources for too long and you become isolated, then your system starts to get real weird. And we see this with people who are like, have all these resources, but they don't have a lot of like somatic connection or human connection or any of this. And they start to get real weird, like as in like not in ventral vagal. They're not in ventral vagal. They're in something else. They're in faux management. And they're like, I'm fine. I have $1 million. I'm fine. And you're like, you are not that fine. Maybe you should sit down and look at this tree for a second. But privilege, what we're talking about privilege in the sense of toxic privilege, because we all have privilege. I'm privileged here to just be with you all today. Like that's a privilege that I can be really grateful for. But when we talk about privilege in the sense of toxic dissociation, having a lot of resources gives me the ability to not pay attention. It just gives me the capacity to dissociate from what other people are feeling. I don't have to have empathy. I'm fine. I have all these resources. So when we talk about dissociation, it's also this protective mechanism for something that you don't know how to integrate. So there's healthy dissociation, which is like, I'm just going to zone out and watch this television show for an hour. I'm just going to daydream. I'm just going to mindlessly wander in the forest. Those are all forms of healthy dissociation, right? But an unhealthy dissociation is like an addiction pattern, which is to say, I can't look at that, so I'm going to constantly not look at that. And now I'm compelled to run away from anything that seems like it's that same stimulus coming into my system. And then I dissociate, and then I have all of these weird fight, flight, freeze patterns, and then the system starts to increase the pain and becomes further and further fragmented, right? So that's what privilege is in the negative sense, and why when we talk about privilege, we might want to look at the nervous system state and say, is this person talking from this toxic privilege state in which they can afford to dissociate? Literally, it's like they can afford to dissociate from the impact of their actions, from the impact of what they're saying on other people, right? They can just afford to. And then when you look at it, you might say, oh, that person's dissociating not because they can afford to, but because they have to survive. So we're starting to get further and further differentiation based on like, oh, dissociation is sometimes healthy and it's sometimes unhealthy. But now we'll branch off and say, oh, the unhealthiness could be from being able to afford to not empathize, or because you don't have any resources and you can't survive any other way. So you dissociate into more and more fragmentation. And we see this with our clients who are generally poor and dissociated, which is different from a client that might be very rich and dissociated. So slightly different, right? And so we can go further and further into differentiation. That's why I say it takes like 3 years, because it's like college. You're like, oh, I learned about this, and now there's a lot of this. There's a lot of little details. But the main thing I want to sort of give you is this immediacy. You start to notice the nervous system state, and then you start to ask some questions about it, just very casually, if you can, like, oh, what's going on here? Am I dissociating? Why am I potentially dissociating? What are they dissociating? Why might they be potentially dissociating? Because we can't even get anywhere until we're associated. We're back in our bodies, in our lower dantian, and then we can go ventral vagal. Great, now we can talk about everything. So it's the same thing. It's just, it's, see cycles and loops and stuff, right? So, Chris, what did that do for you? What did all my talking do for you just now? Did it put anything together? Did it tear things apart?
A lot of things, actually. I am someone who does dissociate. And then I'm like, wait, am I privileged? And I'm like, I don't think I'm privileged, but, in the way where I feel of privilege, what privilege is. But again, there's gray scales to it.
That's right.
The big thought that kind of germinated was this idea of like following my own tract and like, right? So I was very individual, like until I was like, you know what? It's my motivation for even doing Think Movement was like, if I have all this information, a bunch of people have information, right? Let's just get more information and like, let's build the library of knowledge. But it wasn't until I had, and I never meant to, but I had like a group of people through Think Movement that I began to only look at this group. Instead of, I didn't really pay attention to anybody, but now I'm paying attention to this group and like not caring about any other group because I have a group, but I never really wanted. So it's my mind, I'm just like, oh gosh, there's a lot there.
Yeah,
so
totally.
That's the biggest thing kind of flip for me.
Yeah. So what you might even think of is like, there's developmental stages that we can't skip. And we know this from movement. So just frame it as movement. It's like, if you don't know how to engage your core, you probably can't do this giant jump, right? I mean, this is reality, right? There's developmental stages. There's also developmental stages socially and biosocially. And those aren't necessarily the same for everyone, because everyone grows up in a different way with different attachment patterns and different ancestral trauma complexes and blah, 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 blah. Everyone has a different thing. Cultural contexts, all of it's different. So you might come to this part of your developmental stage at this age in your life and be like, oh, that's where I'm at. But to just recognize you are on a trajectory of titration, which is moving from smaller to bigger, from simplicity to complexity. This is just what it is, right? Moving from simple to complex. Moving from slower to faster, simple to complex, from lower intensity to higher intensity, because your threshold can now absorb it right. Before, you probably couldn't, and that's why you didn't have it. So this is the thing.
Yeah, I think too, as you think about it, the immediate reaction being like, I'm not privileged, like
sure.
that quick, because it's a bad thing, it's a negative thing.
Right.
But again, instead of having a reaction to it, to sit in it, and in some ways, probably absolutely, and to be like, that's a thing instead of a judgment thing.
Right. Well, to understand also that there's differentiation. When I say privileged, I'm noticing ecosystem of things that word can point to. The privilege of having able-bodied is one thing. The privilege of growing up with white skin, that's a different thing. And they're not the same thing, but then they interact. The privilege of having an iPad that I can talk to all of you, that's real too. The privilege of growing up in a time where there's such a thing as the internet, that's a kind of privilege. But it's not like all privileges are bad. Mostly what we're talking about is unequal distribution of privilege. People are upset, rightly so, that they've been forcefully oppressed so that they can't feel good. So that's the thing that people are talking about when we talk about privilege. It's like, to check your privilege, like this word, this meme, check your privilege, right? Okay. So checking your privilege would be to be grateful for what you have and to share as much as possible and to be aware of your positionality. That's it. It's like, I'm aware of what I have and I'm working to distribute that in a good way. I don't have to be the Dalai Lama or Mother Teresa, but in my own way, I can distribute the good feeling that I have by not being an ass in life, right? I can just be kind to people because I can afford to be kind. Some people can't afford to be kind, and that's super real. So we're just trying to differentiate these terms because these terms are loaded with all these compacted meanings. And the part of trauma healing is to untangle what isn't differentiated yet and make it differentiated, to go from simple to complex and still maintain this pleasurable way of integrating. Oh yeah, that thing went from simple to complex and I didn't dissociate. I just saw it transform into something more complex. This happens with your clients. If you watch it from this angle, you'll notice that aha moment that neurologically happens when people can suddenly get a movement. That's what's happening. When you can get a movement or receive a healing or receive the benefit of a touch massage or something, that moment is the system not dissociating and getting more complex differentiation. To know, oh, my life isn't just all pain. Suddenly there's goodness and there's still pain, but now there's more. I can see more. And then when someone gets a more complex movement, that's what's happening neurologically too. Suddenly you can, juggle. Whereas like 2 months ago, you couldn't juggle because the system was trying to differentiate movements and different patterns and coordination. Suddenly differentiation happens and then the system stabilizes at that new level of differentiation over and over and over again. And this happens, hopefully this happens forever in our lives because we're never not adapting, right? Like this isn't like a thing we should have done when we were 8 and now we're done. It's like, nah, right?
Fine. You haven't spoken too much and I know that you're taking this all in. So I'm just curious if you, just any of your thoughts specifically, you could kind of jump in with what you're taking in here.
I'm connecting it to a lot of different areas in my life. And I am kind of in that place of like needing to lie on the floor for an hour at the same time. So like I just the timing of this call like is really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will, how about this? You can stay on the call, but you can lay down right now. Literally, like, yeah. See, there's like no need to perform for us. Just be here, but do what you got to do. So we have about a half hour left. And so I want to give the group a time to sort of recapitulate, digest a bit, and also look a little bit what we have left for the outline. We have left observations on who are the loudest and most seen voices in movement culture. I don't feel like that's super juicy, but I do think that number 4 is super juicy, which is thoughts and considerations on how we as a small community might shift our lens through a broader cultural perspective. And then connected to that is 5 is how we as individuals can set out to change the process and product of internal through cultural systems. And that's a bit of jargon, but it basically just is that modeling thing. It's like, how can I as an individual affect my culture, my subculture, my larger culture, etc.? So seeing it as a kind of Russian nesting doll. But I'm also keen as to just be like, where are all of you at and where do you want to go for the next half an hour?
I think focusing on 4 and 5 is kind of like, and again, we might all need to lay on the floor and digest a lot of that. But so maybe that we as individuals can kind of say our piece as far as, because I do think we're all compassionate. I do think, I mean, we're here and we do what we do and we give it away because we do want others to have access to the things we know, the things that have been helpful. And we also listen to how to let others teach us. So I think either toggling between 4 and 5, if we consider those things, we can get individual perspectives kind of on each. Just for the sake of visual, maybe Jen, if you could we can just kind of go counterclockwise. We'll go Jen, Sanders, Gary through that loop and just see what comes out from that input.
All right. I'm happy to chat a little bit if you guys want.
Yeah. Free chat. Yeah.
Something I find really interesting about all of this is I don't find movement an inclusive thing. And one of the main reasons why is I feel like it's a lot of people who are trying to get other people to move like them. And a lot of the people I work with, that is not the case at all. You know, I've got people who have been in, for whatever reason, traditional exercise has not worked for them. They've been injured. They have a series of injuries. And I actually feel like those people feel like fitness is for the privileged, as you were saying, like the able-bodied. Like my MS client, she can't go to, you know, like my stroke clients, there are things they can't do. And so this topic, I think it's so big because not only is it's certainly, as you also noted, you know, I am a Caucasian woman. I understand that I am speaking from a place of privilege and I have had access to things because of what I look like and resources that others don't have available to them. I don't have any clients of color. And that also is something that always gets to me. I'm like, how is, that's not fair. So it's just so much bigger than yeah, there's so many different places you could go with it. So I find it really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also a bit of like, if you can map out your influences and your privileges on sort of like a topographical way, like just as a thing, no one is asking you to do all the things. You might not be able to do all the things. As a white woman, you might never have a client of color. That's just fucking real. I don't know where you live, but like, this is real shit. And you might not be able to change that. But there's probably other things you could do, like donate to a group that gives free classes to clients of color led by teachers of color. Like, I don't know how you could be of help, but the point is that it's very big, but then we just differentiate and we parse it out and we just go, oh, but where do I have leverage? Not where I have leverage, but where do I have leverage in order to change the system as it is? And sometimes we might not have very much, and then we get sad and we have to do a grieving process around how little leverage we think we have. That's totally fine. But more the point is that if you sit with it, and you sit with it in a really good way, and you draw pictures about it, and you really map it out, you might come to some newer conclusions about how, not just how big it is, but where you are in that bigness and go, oh, it's actually navigatable. Like, I can navigate from here to here. That's totally easy to do, right? So thank you for sharing. Yeah, the ableism thing's super big, right? I do want to say one more thing. So I'm partially disabled. I don't want to get into what all that is, but the movement practice that I've found to be the most consistent that I can do no matter what state I've been in is authentic movement, which is like creative movement. You set a timer, someone witnesses you, doesn't have to have a witness. You set a timer, person closes their eyes or keeps them open, but they basically just do free form movement, whatever they want to do for that time. That's it. This can really help to integrate a system that doesn't think that it can do things. Because even at the beginning, if they're just standing there and breathing, it's okay. That's what the system needs in order to get a little bit more comfortable that it exists, and over and over and over again, right? And so this is like super unstructured structure. It's like spontaneous Qigong. That's actually where it comes from, spontaneous Qigong. But you don't even have to know all that shit. You're just like, oh, you're a body. What do you want to do in this space? You want to lay on the floor for 20 minutes? Great. Lay on the floor. You want to make sounds? Great. Do what you need, right? It's this thing that helps people wherever they're at. And it's the thing that I constantly go back to. Oh, I don't feel so good. I'm just going to do authentic movement for 2 minutes. Suddenly my system is more integrated. There's less pain. It just works. So yeah, I wanted to say that. So next person is Sanders. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a super interesting conversation. I think it's a good one. And I have also been very interested in how best to, like, as far as like the number 5 one, how to get back and how to kind of change the system a bit, because I myself came from like super poor background, a rough area. Obviously, I'm a white guy, so I've seen my black friends get like arrested for no reason constantly, and it's just mind blowing sometimes to see how different things can be, and then also realizing, for example, I learned parkour. I didn't have to pay anybody for it. I just researched, did a lot of trial and error. Was lucky enough to get sponsored and travel around and learn from other people and this kind of thing. And so I remember one of the hardest things for me to do in the beginning was to like charge people to learn how to do parkour from me. I was like, anybody can just go out and do it or whatever. And like, and so realizing that there's, some people that need obviously like that kind of money as a way to buy into something that they want to commit to, but they're kind of fence for. But then there's also people, I hope so, I believe that there's people like me who like have maybe zero monetary resources, but they do have the time and the energy to get out. So like a thing that I'm always thinking about is like, how do you balance this, using your skills to make a sustainable life for yourself while also using them to, increase the quality of life for others, So I used to run a free community session every week while also running my normal classes and tell people like, yeah, you can do this free community session. I teach it every single week on this location, And I think the only thing missing was like, I had no idea the best way to like, I didn't know how to get through to a person like myself that like has all the desire to do it, that doesn't need any kind of like monetary impetus to start it, but I can't find these people. And so like, I think, those never got bigger than like 5 people, and it was like kind of sporadic and stuff like this. So I'd be really interested in how to like even empower people to come out to it, because you get people, that they don't think movement's for them, they don't think anything's for them, so they're already shut off. I've had friends like not want to do parkour because they think it's too crazy for months, and then they try like one session and they realize like they can do a lot more than they can. I'm sure all of you guys have experienced this with everything, and it's like we see it countless times. So what's the best way to help empower people, to really believe that they can do more than they can, because they have to do that themselves first to even come to us before then we can assist them with it, right? So what can be that spark? It's a really interesting thought that's been coming from this conversation.
Great. Good stuff. Yeah, it's that chewy question that won't get answered today, but that you're gonna, it's like you really want to date this person and you have to figure out what they like. right? It's like, I really need to court. It's a courtship process, right? These kinds of questions are very, there's something there that we don't know, but we know we need to keep dancing with it. Yeah.
I think the other thing that helps me really feel grateful for is the perspective that I've been able to come across from like traveling so much, like meeting people like you, teaching in America and in the UAE and here in Turkey and all sorts of other places. I think this perspective really helps you, I think, be a little bit more honest, not only with like your privilege, but also the lack of it in other places. Like I went to India for a job once and just being like, holy crap, people live like this here. And it's like, even in my even being homeless in America is better than having a place sometimes in India. You know what I mean? Like seeing the kind of stuff that they have to go through is like unfathomable, And so I think that's like a good perspective. That is something, again, that you're like, how can we help people get perspective and get into this place of like accepting? Because like people so easily get into this threat mode that you were mentioning, and it's, if we can really just get into a place of like, we're all just humans trying to make this work, man. It's just
Totally. Right.
Let's just hear each other out and try and figure out a solution instead of shouldering the weight of our ancestry or our privilege or what we did or all this kind of stuff. It's I think it's a big problem, especially coming to the forefront in the US for sure.
Yeah. It's a bit like social emotional parkour, to be completely honest. It's like, that's what I do. Like when I'm doing my work, I'm like, oh, this is like really taxing on my nervous system on a certain level, because it's like, I'm like essentially like navigating all these strange obstacles and trauma and people's things and being like, all right. And then we do Aikido with this thing, and then we hug this thing, and then we roll under this thing. Yeah, it's super real. But to be able to transfer skills, I think that's the thing I think about the most when I'm missing movement practices that I used to just move a lot more than I do now, is that the transfer of skill transfer is like a big deal for me. And I think we talk about it a lot in terms of like movement to movement transfer of skill. Like, oh, you're doing weightlifting and now you're doing gymnastics and now you're doing Tai Chi. It's like there's a transfer there. But then there's this other, so that I would call lateral transfer. But then there's sort of like non-vertical transfer or diagonal transfer, some other non-lateral transfer, which is, how do we take what we've learned in movement and then apply it to social or emotional or institutional or something else, artistic? Like we start to go, oh, these principles work, but they look like this over here. And we start to like, fractal it out. So I would just say keep wrestling with this, but also see how you can transfer parkour skills into other parts of your own life first, and then be like, oh, that's possible. Like what can I do with this emotionally? Like just go from physical to emotional, to go from sensation to emotion. It's like a quick little jump, and then see what comes out of that, fruitful challenge. All right, so Gary, we're on to you.
Addressing 4 and 5, I'm kind of what I'm processing through the 2 lenses I'm working with are the people in pain and teaching people how to recognize the characteristics of their body through various movement patterns, through repetition, organization, but also through my experience in aquatics, where I'm constantly working with individuals who potentially feel like they're under threat by virtue of not being able to manage the aquatic environment well, and their parents who are incredibly fearful of the eventuality of their child not knowing how to manage themselves in the water and potentially being injured or God forbid pass away. But I think how on 4, how we can you know, as a small community, create a broader cultural perspective. I think the easiest way to do that is to recognize that we're not a small community, but we're a subset of the larger community of humankind, that, you know, we as individuals have a very particular set of lenses that we see the world through, and then strengths that we have, and these golden pieces of our existence that we hold up to everybody else to show them, like, hey, you could have this too. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone. We all have these, you know, in the same way we all have these golden things like we've been talking about right now. We all have the stress responses and these ways that we guard and protect ourselves from these perceived threats. You know, I feel a lot of what we do and a lot of what I do in context of that is just showing people that the threats they thought were threats aren't necessarily threats, and meeting them on their level and showing them you don't have to have the capacity of this. Just recognize where you are here and now. You know, showing them literally where they are movement wise and giving them like a sense of where they are, but then also showing them where they can go. And that's a lot of broad kind of generalities around what it is to shape people's movement practice or the experience of their body. But then in the specifics, we all bring something to the table that offer people an opportunity to check into themselves. So I think that's kind of how we can help, and looking outward into the world that we're trying to shape. Yeah.
Yeah, what I hear you a bit, I'm just going to reflect a bit,
Sure.
maybe translate. I hear it's like a switch from privilege to practice. Like, practice is the fact that, like, hey, if you practice this, you're probably going to get better at it. You might not be as good as, you know, this person, but you could be as good as you can be. You know, switching from this idea that like talent exists into things that are just like skillful practice, right? It's like, who gives a crap about talent, to be completely honest? It's all practice, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I
And
think it's
getting
also
people, yeah.
no. I think in what you mentioned about comparison, you know, and you know, people looking at others to say, "Oh, look how great they are. I can't be that great." You know, that's a poor use of comparison. You know,
Totally.
you know,
It's a poor use of comparison. Yeah, sure.
you know, so you know, comparison could be like, "Oh, look at that cool thing. Let me try that too." Not like, "Oh, I can't do that as good as them," you know, but to see that that's a capability.
That's
The
right.
human body can do that. The human spirit can do that.
That's right. Yeah, and this goes back to the primary thing that when I work with trauma is getting people from the what's wrong attention to the what's right attention, or from the what's impossible to the what's possible, what's not working to what's working. You know, this is like the fundamental nervous system shift in attention that has to be ingrained into people, not focusing only ever on what's wrong. And so if I just tie this back to what Chris talked about with this immediacy thing, when you're with people for the first week after this call, just notice how many times people start talking about what's wrong. Just start noticing and look at the ratio between people talking about or noticing what's wrong versus what's right. And you'll see a ridiculous ratio. And I want you to sort of notice it in yourself and just be like, oh, when I sit down and start thinking about something, how quickly does my mind go to the problem rather than the resources that I have or the love that I have or whatever. And this is like the fundamental attention shift that creates this positive change. Is just what you were talking about there. It's like, oh, I saw a thing and I didn't feel angry or jealous. I felt, wow, that's curious and wonderful.
Exactly.
That someone else can do that, right? Like, this is the thing. This is like the fucking thing.
Yeah, when I talk to people, you know, when my clients come in, some of them are still very heavily into the story of why their pain exists and why it's supposed to be there and why they can't. And the first thing I always go to is, well, what have you been practicing? And then it kind of changes the narrative, and then we're going to somewhere that they can actually grow from.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. What have you been practicing and what feels good already?
Yeah.
And then people are like, what? Right? And that changes the nervous system state. That's a ventral vagal question. That's a ventral vagal kind of question. It brings people back to like, oh, right. Yeah, what feels good already? Suddenly the system will just start to wobble and go out of fight and flight and fawn and all that. It'll just start nudging towards ventral vagal again, right? And so the thing that I like to think about is like, you know, I love martial arts, but the thing that I do, this trauma healing, etc., is I call it like the martial arts of relating. Because instead of having to think about a punch, I can think about signals and communication being transmitted. And then how do I do Aikido or anything with those signals? And then what do I send out into the field? What is my stance that allows the system to start to become better? Right? It's like, just like Qigong, it's like, oh, this stance produces an effect. Great, so what's my relational stance? And what the words that I'm speaking from when I'm in that relational stance that allow myself or another person to be better in that moment. And you're all doing it. Like none of this is stuff you're not doing, but I'm just like highlighting this like minute part of it and be like, yeah, so now do it more with more consciousness. And you have now more differentiation so that you can have more complexity in how you do it. And granted, I'm so glad this call has been recorded, because if you watch this again in a month, it's like you'll have a different experience. This is just something I've learned. It's like, record it, because we can only digest so much at any one time, and then we watch it again and we're like, holy shit. And this is like the gift that keeps on giving. Nervous system stuff, it's like the gift, titration and bumping up thresholds. It's like keeps on happening. And so you'll probably be surprised at how much this will affect you in the days to come in little ways that you didn't expect it to. And this is just from my experience of seeing a pattern in the way that I'm working produces an effect in the systems that I'm interacting with, to give people this idea that like, you do have more choice than you think you do. You absolutely do. And it has to be just right for you. Just right for you. Next steps. What's the next right step? Oh, I'm going to take a walk. Great. Drink some water. So it's almost time. It's 11:27. And I don't expect this conversation to be over in any regard. It can be over for today, but it's not complete or resolved or anything like that. And so I would just like to say in this moment, like, thank you, Chris, for inviting me. And if anyone wants to talk to me more, my email is pretty available. Like, I'm not hiding from anybody. So you can email me, or you can start a conversation with Chris, and maybe that can happen. I don't know what'll happen, but there's options. And I'm going to open it back up to everyone and to Chris to just say like here's like how I would like to do a check out, which is similar to the check-in that we did, which is focusing on positive sensations that you received from this call. They don't even have to make sense, but focusing on what you're taking away that's positive from just being in this call today, and focusing mostly on the sensation level, but you don't have to only do that. Yeah, and taking about 1 to 2 minutes for the four of you, and maybe Jeremy if they feel like it. Jeremy Fein if they feel like it, but they don't have to just sort of check out in the similar way to the way that we checked in.
I feel like I did a lot of physical stuff. Like, as I'm processing, and I think I process things physically as a surrogate and or an assistant to mental processing. Like, I feel like I just did a lot of labor, and generally, like, the excited tingling is an exhaustive, like, you know, I don't want to say depletion, because there's still an energy there.
Right.
But I also, it definitely has shifted more lower body.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's the cart. So yeah. So the wave that you experienced, right? You had a peak, and then you have a valley,
Yeah.
And then you'll have a recovery, and that's okay. But noticing the activation, the deactivation is now you're not depleted, but you're deactivating. That's the key to regulating the system. Oh, activation, deactivation, recovery. Great, awesome. It'll be fine. Don't push yourself harder than you need to. Don't shortcut the deactivation. That's the key. Don't shortcut it.
Well, that's where I will linger for a while.
Good. Good.
I feel currently that I have in my body a very round sensation of something that's captured and stored kind of from the bottom of my throat to the base of my pelvis, and my arms and legs are waiting to discharge energy. Partly maybe because of the setting, but also because of what we've been kind of encapsulating today and how that's kind of, I feel like I have a nice round shell around these concepts, and I'm always eager to share them, and more so still, but right now I think I really just need to unload some energy.
Great. Awesome. That's a great check-in. I love that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I feel settled and grounded. I also feel a little sleepy, but I don't know if that's because I'm hungry or if that's because I'm deactivated. So I'm not sure where that is, but mostly settled and grounded.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
Feel taller. I'm not just like sitting down. Like my spine's kind of like elongated and like, you know when you get one of those metal things?
Yeah, that, yeah.
Kind of have
The
like
hair,
this
yeah.
thing going on, and like,
Yeah.
definitely feel a bit rejuvenated. I think
Good.
I mentioned it a little bit, obviously with Celine and some of my other friends and family here and stuff, and I think it's been a bit lonely for sure. So it's nice to like, at the very least, just reconnect with some kind of kindred spirits and get some good like ideas and things flowing, you know. So
Totally.
warm and healing kind of feeling.
Great. Thank you. And I just I'll do a check-in. So I feel a bit of the round feeling that Gary's feeling. I also feel a bit of this feeling that Christine was talking about, which is like depleted but not depleted. I feel like I just did a lot of work, like I gave a lot, but it feels good. Like I feel like the giving itself feels very good. It's like exercising a muscle, and you're like, oh yeah, that's why I do this thing, because I've learned to make it feel good when I do this thing. So that's really nice. Yeah, I don't have any much more to check in on that, but I do want to say in closing, thank you to all of you that showed up here today to have this kind of conversation. I hope that I surprised you with the way that I held the space around such an interesting topic. And also the same goes for anyone who listens to this call in the future. I don't know what that will be like, but wherever this conversation goes, I really have a lot of gratitude and compassion for all the people who will engage with it in the future. And a special shout out to Jeremy Fein for being exactly where they need to be right now, because that's modeling the healing behavior, and I love to see that freedom. So thank you, everyone. I'm sure that I will check back in with Chris in a few days or something, and we'll just talk about how it went. But for right now, go do something else.
I just I want to jump in there about Jeremy real quick. It's like I look at his empty box and I like literally feel warm from my heart. So Jeremy, to get back to this, I know you're going through something, buddy, and 3,000 miles away, I'm also going to be laying on the floor. Just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, great. Yeah, do something else, even if it's laying on the floor.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all so much. It's 11:34 over here, and so I've only kept you 4 minutes later, but thank you so much, and I hope to talk to all of you again someday down the line.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, dear.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. See you guys. Awesome to see you.